We resume our look at dependency ratios and double dependency by looking at a map of the world and seeing where our differences exist with child dependency, old age dependency, and where both of these dependencies occur. Remember that dependency ratios look at the percentage of the population that is below 15 or over 64 divided by the percentage of the population between 15 and 64. So we're looking at the percentage of our population that is not of working age versus the percentage of the population that is working age. And you'll recall that that demographic dividend occurs when the vast majority of our population is of working age. If we have high child dependency ratios, then we're looking at investing a lot of money into schools, education, child health care. If we have an old age dependency scenario, then we're looking at supporting social services like healthcare or retirement housing, right? How do we support our oldest and most vulnerable parts of our population? So you'll see here that the United States has what's known as double dependency, where we have moderate child dependency and high old age dependency. Throughout places in Europe, we see that old age dependency extending into China and Japan. In Africa, we see high child dependency, which suggests that these populations are going to grow rapidly. Where the populations in dark purple, we expect to really hit the end of stage 4 in the coming decades as that population stabilizes and most likely declines, contracts. When a country has a high percentage of its population in its elderly cohorts or age groups over 64, they face what's called a demographic collapse. And this is when we have high old age dependency, known as the graying of a population. When, again, like a scenario like Japan, where a high percentage of our population is over 64. This occurs, again, at the end of stage 4. Our fertility rate is very low. The percentage of our population that is deemed elderly is 40% or higher. Again, the issues here, who pays and who works, right? How do we support this aging cohort? How do we support this aging group? Again, healthcare is going to be relatively costly because as people enter the final decades of their life, they seek more treatment, their healthcare costs increase. So we need a younger group of people to pay for this, to support this. Oftentimes we see issues with healthcare play out in the political arena. It's not a political issue as much as it is a demographic issue. We see in some countries, particularly like Japan, that there's a stigma surrounding parental leave. Oftentimes women have to choose between having a career or having children. So what we find in countries where these social and political barriers are in place is that women may wait until their late 30s to start family planning, which means that their fertility rate is going to decline as they bypass many years within that window of 16 to 49. So if there's stigma with parental leave like we have in Japan, if our population is aging, if it's post-industrial and more people are pursuing academics and pursuing careers, then we're going to delay childbearing. We're going to delay family growth. So in a demographic collapse, we run into a scenario where our population is aging, we're not replacing it with younger people, and we find ourselves in a scenario as to how do we fund this? How do we pay for these social services that are needed for our elderly population? So again, we recognize here dependency ratios and how they play out. A favorable dependency ratio gives us that demographic dividend. A bad dependency ratio or a concerning dependency ratio could lead to demographic collapse if we're imbalanced towards a high elderly population. And the final part of our look at population geography and our look at graphic representations of population change and population composition and change brings us to population pyramids. The pyramid on the right-hand side of the screen reflects the world's population. As you can see, it is a relatively cone-shaped triangle. It's not too broad at the base, but it narrows as it goes to the top. This shape is based on births, deaths, and fertility. It's based on those different demographic factors that we've discussed. Sex ratio, you can see that we're about split between men and women. That women are on the right, men are on the left. The triangle is about evenly split down the middle, meaning that we have roughly the same amount of men as women. You'll notice that as we get into our older cohorts, that women generally live longer, so the percentages are slightly higher. Life expectancy is increasing around the world, so our pyramid is growing taller. The population growth, again, is reflected by a pyramid shape, and that's what we have here. We have stable growth. If the bottom of our pyramid starts to taper, narrow off relative to the middle, that means we're going to have population decline. So this population pyramid tells us about the current state of where we are. It tells us about life expectancy. It tells us about births and deaths and fertility. So as we move up the pyramid, we see that our deaths increase with those older cohorts. We see that evenly or relatively even split we find between men and women. The social issues that we're going to discuss in specific countries will alter the shape of our pyramid. The first pyramid we're going to examine is that of Mali. And Mali, you'll recall, was one of our examples for stage 2 of the demographic transition model. Mali is experiencing rapid growth. Mali has a very broad base. So if you look at the age cohorts, you see that a large percentage of this population exists or consists of people under the age of 19, kids. So this broad base in this young population means that this population is going to grow for the foreseeable future. The reasons for this is that CDR is relatively low because we don't have many people in this population beyond middle age. If you look at the cohorts, below 45 to 49 is almost the entire population. So we have a very small segment of that population actually over 50. Infant mortality. The infant mortality rate is dropping as hygiene and sanitation and access to healthcare is improving. So more kids are living. The TFR is high. It's about 6, meaning that the average woman in Mali is having 6 kids. So as 6 kids per couple is expanding the population, that expansion is increasing again because infant mortality is dropping. So TFR of 6 is one number, but if infant mortality is dropping, that means that the likelihood of 5 or 6 of these kids surviving increases. We have an agricultural economy that is starting to shift to industry. So again, when we have an ag economy, as discussed in the demographic transition model, a large family is deemed an asset. This country is experiencing what's known as demographic momentum. Even if our TFR dropped to 2.1 replacement level, this population would grow for the foreseeable future because all of those kids in those smallest cohorts are going to reach childbearing age. They're going to at least double. So the current fertility rate in Mali is reflective of that population explosion. The graphic on the bottom left shows the anticipated growth of Mali through this century. So it's expected that Mali is going to exceed 90 million people by 2100. So that momentum is strong. Even as the fertility rate will drop as the economy shifts, those young cohorts are going to continue to at least double, expanding the size of this population. Our next pyramid is Mexico. Mexico was used for stage 3. As Mexico begins to narrow out the bottom of its pyramid, it reflects a shift away from agriculture to more industrialization and urbanization, where kids are deemed less as assets and more as liabilities because they don't enter the workforce, they don't contribute to the family business at such a young age. We also see the status of women changing. Again, women have more opportunities for education and work, so they are delaying having kids. We're seeing a rapid decrease in our fertility rate. One, because infant mortality rates have dropped, meaning more kids are surviving the first year of life. And two, women are having fewer kids because of those other opportunities. This is what a pyramid looks like when it reaches the demographic dividend. So with the Mali example, we're going to have a very high child dependency issue. In stage 3, we don't have much of a dependency issue because the majority of our population is working. We have a very small elderly cohort, and we have fewer kids than in the past. So with the majority of our country, the vast majority of our country of working age, that sets the stage for positive economic development. As you can see here, the projection is that Mexico will continue to grow its population until around 2070 or so, and then it will begin to decline as it moves into stage 4 of the demographic transition model, where birth rates and death rates start to even out. The United States is also an example of stage 4. Stage 4 is stable. The reasons for that is a high standard of living. That high standard of living carries with it a high cost of living. So childcare is increasingly expensive. Excuse me, as I mentioned, childcare is increasingly expensive. Increased gender equality, again, delays the start of family planning, delays the start of growing your family, having children. The United States has a very low TFR today, total fertility rate, down under 2, which means that our population, by that measure, would be expected to decline. But the United States is a little bit different than other countries in that our population is more supported by in-migration. Immigrants are generally arriving for economic reasons, which places them in our working age cohorts, primarily the younger end of our working age cohorts. You could also see in the United States pyramid some swelling around the 55 to 64 range. That was the baby boom. That was the largest generation in American history. And then a little farther down in the 25 to 29 bracket, you could see the baby boom's children. As they reached replacement level, they expanded again. But you'll notice some tapering down at the bottom of this pyramid, which suggests, again, this population is stable and would begin to contract if not for immigration. China is another stage 4 country. You'll notice how imbalanced this pyramid is because of the political policy known as the one-child policy. Recently, they've loosened that policy because the population was contracting at the base and aging. So China recognized that this policy worked. It was an extreme policy for planning. This aggressive form of population planning worked in terms of numbers by reducing China's current population by an estimated 300 million people. But again, it wasn't without consequences. You'll notice, again, where this pyramid contracts. So the one-child policy is over 40 years old. And you recognize in the 35 to 40s age ranges where this pyramid contracts. So while China was overly concerned with a growing dependency issue with children, they ended up creating, in the short term, dependency issues with the oldest part of the population. So they cut off a generation of workers because they were worried that the population was growing too fast. In 40 years later, they created a scenario where the elderly population is going to have a difficult time finding support because of the imbalanced dependency ratio. So the one-child policy moved China to stage 4 more rapidly than it would have occurred had this policy not existed.